I agree with the comments and statements of Lisa Greenhill. While it is important to be inclusive and promote diversity, we must also be aware that right now, a specific community, the Black community, is hurting and needs support. Also, I agree with Dean Nelson and the fact that it's a deep conversation that will require perseverance. We can't unteach racist practices and mentality, but we can strive to educate and inform. But most importantly, we must take an active stance on change, i.e. voting. While in good intentions, I have to disagree with the All Lives Matter approach to the conversation. That is not respecting nor listening to the cries that our global community is facing currently. Yes, all lives matter, but at this moment, a specific community's life is at stake and needs our support. I do wish this video had more voices from the Black veterinary community, providing a space for them to express their thoughts and emotions right now. As a non-Black individual, I want to create a space to just listen to the needs of the community that is hurting right now. Understand their stories, their pain, and prospective outcomes.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's town hall entitled A Black Perspective on Race in Veterinary Medicine, a Conversation. The statement you just heard was submitted by one of you in response to a survey after the CVM community watched an edited video of an AAVMC Dean's meeting shortly after the death of George Floyd. We will play a number of your comments to illustrate the spectrum of thoughts and opinions expressed by the CVM community throughout the program. It is not our intention to respond to any of these comments. However, we will attempt to partially fulfill the wishes expressed in the one just heard. We appreciate the time you are about to spend with us. We consider your curiosity flattering and hope to fulfill the potential of investment, an investment in yourself, an investment in the social climate of our college and university, a step toward improving our relations with each other for the good and future of our college, our university, our profession, indeed, our country. We have an interesting program for you, but first, let me tell you what this isn't. This is not a program of recrimination, accusations, or finger pointing. Though we hope to reestablish a historical basis of our present situation, our ultimate goal is to enhance a personal understanding of the African-American experience over the past 50 years. Toward that end, I have asked two special guests who will be introduced a little later in the program to join me in sharing personal experiences we hope will elucidate the cauldron of emotions presently exploding in America's cities. The request I have made of my friends requires a special kind of personal exposure, submits them to a special kind of risk, and cannot be accomplished without a special kind of courage. I want to express my deep gratitude to my friends. I am in your debt for your investment in our efforts. Now let me introduce you to the people that proved to be critical to delivering this program other than our special guests. We are being supported by university personnel, Michael Bradford and Alyssa Robin. Our videographer is Ms. Nicole Nelson. Our planning team is comprised of CVM personnel. And I want to introduce our program manager and video sequencer, Ms. Kimberly Jones first. And then the remaining team members. They are Dr. Spring Holland, large animal internist, Dr. Ohad Levy, surgeon, and Dr. Susie Kovacs, epidemiologists, and specialists in diversity and inclusion. And now I will turn things over to the team. Enjoy the program.
Thank you all for joining us today. Yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and in that spirit, we will first pause to acknowledge that Western University of Health Sciences sits on traditional Tongva land. We give thanks and pay respect to elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. After George Floyd's murder on May 25th of this year, the support for the Black Lives Matter movement, a modern-day civil rights movement that began with a hashtag in 2013, erupted throughout all facets of society. The response was global, and much of the reactions were just that, reactions to social injustice that has always been part of society and was now suddenly urgent. While well-intended, many of our reactions were false starts. We thought that by championing diversity and inclusion and using all the buzzwords that equated to the mattering of all lives, we were fixing a problem. But we failed to address the problem head on. Black Lives Matter. Our college has reacted as well. While we have been having these conversations about diversity, inclusion, and social justice at the college since its inception, the conversations have not been loud enough or uncomfortable enough. We pride ourselves on having the most diverse student body of the least diverse profession in the country, but we need to do better. We need to have louder and more uncomfortable conversations, and we need to lean into those conversations with humility and grace. Humility when we come from places of privilege, and grace should be afforded to everyone who wants to help us heal. And how do we heal? I believe an important part of healing is to listen to each other, especially to each other's stories. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear stories from two very dear friends of our CVM family, Dr. Michael Blackwell and Dr. Ruby Perry, and from our dean, Dr. Phil Nelson. We will then have a moderated Q&A session with all three of today's guests. But before we begin, I will turn it over to my fellow team members to say a few words.
You're on mute, sir.
Good evening. My name is Zoad Levy, and I'm professor of surgery at WesternU. I want to tell you briefly what made me one of the organizers of this evening. Immediately after the murder of George Floyd, I talked to a good friend of mine from the School of Veterinary Medicine in UPenn. After we talked about the protest in which our students participated, he told me, "Surely Dr. Nelson told you." I didn't ask him what I supposed to hear, but I turned to Dr. Nelson to ask him what he was supposed to tell us. In reply, Dr. Nelson sent to our Dean's Cabinet members the video that many of you must have seen from the AAVMC Dean's meeting, in which they discussed the turbulent situation in the whole country. Like many of us, I have read books and watched movies about the African Americans' problem of discrimination against African Americans. But after watching that video, the most obvious things for me is how much I don't know and how much I lack a personal testimony on the subject. After a long conversation with Dr. Nelson, he was convinced that our entire school family needed to watch this video. And so we came to the important meeting of today that I hope that will be another step to each one of us to reach the justice that the African American community in the country deserves. Thank you for coming, and I will pass to my colleagues here.
Hi, and good evening. I'm glad you guys are all here. My name is Spring Howland, and I, like many of you, watched the AAVMC video, but I also got to read all of the comments. And maybe I should back up in that I grew up in a very, very rural, conservative Minnesota area where our idea at that time of diversity was, were you German? Were you Scandinavian? Were you Italian? Or were you Polish? So my lens was very different. But after watching that video and seeing all those comments, it made me decide that I had to do something more and to educate myself, because as I want to echo what Dr. Levy said, there was a lot I didn't know and a lot of things that I didn't even know that I didn't know. And so I've decided to put myself out there and be in a place that might maybe make me uncomfortable, but I want to grow. I want to be better. I want to be a better human, and I want to be an ally. I'm so glad you're with us tonight, and I hope you enjoy our program. The next person that's going to introduce themselves is our own Kim Jones, who is our Assistant Director of Academic Affairs in the College of Veterinary Medicine. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. One of the things that I was really excited about being part of this event was because, as a mother of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, most of you know that I'm a mother, for those students of mine. I got really scared when I saw the video of George Floyd, because, you know, that could be my child. And I worry about my children every time they leave the house. Not more so, even when my son, even when they leave the house to go to work, if they get pulled over, I worry, and I want to make this world better. And I'm very committed to making sure that we all learn something from this. We all watch this, and I hope that you feel as uncomfortable but educated and made more aware of your surroundings and what's really happening in the Black community. Because as a mother of 3 Black children, I shouldn't be worried about them being stopped by the police, but I do. So we're going to begin our program. Before we do, we'll visit another comment. I do want to encourage you all, if you have questions, please use the question and answer at the bottom of the page so that we can address your concerns and answer your questions at the end in our panel discussion. So right now, without further ado, here's the next comment. Okay.
The level of ignorance is sad. It's not because we have many foreigners in our community. It is often the U.S. citizens who don't know the story of the diaspora. It's not good enough to know about MLK or Rosa Parks and think you are informed. If you cannot talk about Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, Phyllis Wheatley, Sojourner Truth, Thurgood Marshall, Harriet Tubman, James Baldwin, Ella Baker, W.E.B. Du Bois, Shirley Chisholm, and many others, you are insufficiently prepared to have a credible voice. It's not just about the diaspora. Do you know what tribal lands you are on? Have you ever seen a map of the USA before Christopher Columbus's arrival? What do you know of the tribal lands upon which Mount Rushmore was built? What global history do you know? Saying, "I'm a scientist," is a pathetic excuse for not knowing the basics of the complex stories of colonization.
To truly understand the Black perspective about veterinary medicine, one cannot ignore the historical context of the Black experience in the United States. We would like to share with you now a 15-minute video created by our dean entitled A Historical Perspective on Black Race Relations in America.
We cannot address the issue of race in veterinary medicine in America without addressing the issue and the treatment of race and race relations in American society. Our biases, preconceptions, and subsequent actions regarding race and race relations in our profession and communities are interdependent. In the 1600s, all of Europe was abuzz by the prospect of new land. It led to an era of discovery and conquest, and ultimately, the establishment of a new nation, largely based on an agrarian society. Britain, France, and Spain exported their explorers, their criminals, their warriors, and their persecuted, all looking for a better life. They brought with them their horses, other animals, their experiences, and their tolerance and dependency on indentured servants and slaves. Forging of an early agrarian society was largely successful because of cheap labor through the judicious use of indentured servants, slaves, and animals. The support and care of each was good business, and for all practical purposes, inseparable. It is reported that Charles Clark was the first veterinarian in the States when he set up practice on the East Coast in 1817. America at the time, because of England's influence, promoted the cure or kill approach to medicine, and the byword of the day was traditional cures and the art of medicine. It is not so difficult to describe the cultural ethos of society during this time. Slavery had a firm hold on our society as the underpinning of our agricultural business model and became the center of a national debate, resulting in a civil war approximately 40 years later. Aside from the monumental development of the end of slavery after the war and the brief decade of integration and inclusion during Reconstruction, there wasn't much difference in veterinary medicine or the cultural ethos pre- and post-Civil War. There is nothing to discuss regarding race relations within the profession in the 19th century. They were all white until 1897. August Nathaniel Lushington became the first African American to earn a VMD degree at the University of Pennsylvania in 1897. Dr. John Brown received a DM degree from Kansas State University at the end of the first decade of the 20th century. In 2012, he became the Director of Agricultural Instruction at Tuskegee Institute, initiating a fruitful collaboration between Tuskegee and Kansas State for years to come. In 1910, Dr. Bias became the first African American male to graduate from the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine. Upon graduation, he returned to the South to pursue a veterinary position at today's Tuskegee University. Established on July 4th, 1881 by Booker T. Washington, the private and historically Black university is located in Tuskegee, Alabama, and was home to George Washington Carver, who taught there for 47 years and served as head of its agriculture department. In addition, the school is the alma mater of the World War II African American military pilots, the Tuskegee Airmen. Dr. Frederick Patterson earned his DVM degree from Iowa State College in 1923 and an MS degree in 1927 and a PhD degree from Cornell University in 1932. He became the third president of Tuskegee Institute in 1935 and established the United Negro College Fund
and the School of Veterinary Medicine in 1944. He coined the phrase, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." In 1987, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. While African Americans began to make minimal forays into the profession, the basis of the healthcare being delivered by the profession was also changing. When a hog cholera epidemic hit the Ohio Valley in 1863, the nation began to come to the realization that veterinary medicine just might be important in protecting the country's food supply, as well as their proper role in improving the public health. By the 20th century, veterinary professionals recognized that the tried and true traditions were a poor response to this crisis, and germ theory became the underpinning theory of medicine and was fully entrenched by the mid-20th century. Despite these cracks in the education barriers of America, the social ethos of the first half of the 20th century that largely affected the African American community was characterized by Jim Crow laws, peonage, segregation, lynching, redlining, and domestic terrorism in many areas of the country. In the 1950s, the African American population began to effectively organize and mobilize a national civil rights movement. It resulted in the passing of the Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. America's cultural ethos was changing. Legislation was beginning to align legal protections with the rights defined in the Constitution for all of society. But you can't legislate hearts. It seems that laws are easier to change than attitudes. There was, and still is, considerable active resistance to the spirit and letter of the aforementioned legislative acts, causing obfuscation and impairing the correction of the corrosive and cumulative effects of racial bias. Cultural change on the issue of racism has moved at a glacial pace within the veterinary profession. In the 1980s, the veterinary profession was described as the whitest of all the professions. By 1980, despite significant advances for Blacks in all other areas of science and medicine, the veterinary profession was less than 1% Black. Collectively, we have been able to move the needle just a little. The applicant pool to veterinary colleges was 2% Black in the 80s and 90s, and is now 4% Black. However, Blacks make up 11% of the nation's population. The reasons for this disparity are multifactorial and complex. Overt, covert racism, lack of equity access to quality K-12 education, lack of equity access to affordable housing, the industrial prison complex, the 13th Amendment, and subsequent legal manipulations, and many, many more. In order to solve a problem, you must understand the problem. It is our hope that this brief review of our history helps us understand how we got here. The rest of the evening, we hope our special guests will further elucidate the withering impact our history has on real people, in the hope that it expands your perspective on the pernicious nature of racism. Our profession is a microcosm of our society. The origins of our profession is inextricably integrated in the developing fabric of our agrarian segment of American society. The attitudes of the majority and the racial policies of the nation and its leaders are the major obstacles to addressing these inequities. Resolving racism within our profession will require the members of our profession to resolve to become active in tackling the larger problems of our society. Pick one, I'll pick another. Together, we can get this done. Thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
There are more than 300,000 Black babies murdered by abortion every year in the U.S. Where is the outrage with this? Can we see videos on this? Share a picture of the horror of abortion aftermath as well.
First and foremost, I think we need to listen to the needs of our local Black community at WesternU. Create a space or platform for them to communicate their emotions right now, as they are currently the most afflicted by the current racism and discrimination. I personally did not know about all the suffering and pain the Black community endured, so I decided to educate myself. Reading articles, watching films that discuss Black Lives Matter and their stories. As a non-Black individual, the best thing we can do is educate ourselves. Listen to the stories and empathize with the Black community. Because in order to really achieve these goals, we need to understand and know what they as a community went through. We should also strive and commit to maintaining an anti-racism, anti-discrimination, and anti-bigotry mentality and attitude for all at WesternU, including students, faculty, and staff. I believe the administration needs to identify and address all incidences and acts of racism, discrimination, and bigotry seriously and act accordingly. Now is not the time to be complacent. We need to follow the momentum of the movement in order to strive for a better future.
I am both thrilled and honored to introduce our first guest this evening. Dr. Michael Blackwell, like his father, earned a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from Tuskegee University. He also earned a Master of Public Health degree from Loma Linda University. He currently serves as the Director of the Program for Pet Health Equity at the University of Tennessee. His mission is to improve access to veterinary care for underserved families. Dr. Blackwell previously served as the Dean for the College of Veterinary Medicine at University of Tennessee, Chief of Staff for the Office of the Surgeon General of the United States, Deputy Director for the Center for Veterinary Medicine, Food and Drug Administration, and Chief Veterinary Officer for the U.S. Public Health Service. During 23 years on active duty, he achieved the rank of Assistant Surgeon General, Rear Admiral of the U.S. Public Health Service Commissioned Corps. His awards include the Distinguished Service Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, and 2 Surgeon General's Exemplary Service Medals. He will be joining us later for the panel portion of our event, but for now, here is his story.
You know, I will never forget that day. It was as though it happened yesterday. It was actually a very beautiful morning, kind of a crisp early fall morning. And my dad was taking me to Gray High School. You see, I was one of 4 students to integrate that high school. And I didn't know the other 3 students until I met them within the week, but that was a milestone day for me because I arrived with a lot of mixed emotions, from anxiety to fear. In fact, as we turned that corner, approaching the school, I was fully prepared for a mob of angry white parents and students protesting our arrival. Of course, fortunately, that crowd was not there. Why was I integrating the school in the first place? Turns out that for the first 8 years in public school, I utilized hand-me-down textbooks from the white school. This idea of separate but equal was certainly not true in my own reality. And my dad's thinking was that I needed a good education, and that meant having resources, good textbooks, not having the hand-me-down materials. And so that began my journey of discovery. First thing I felt, besides the fear and anxiety, was through time, a realization of feeling as though I didn't belong. I didn't belong with the white school because, quite frankly, there was a sense of being tolerated, but not desired. And the shocking reality was the reaction in the Black community. There were many who said that I thought I was better than them, that I wanted to go where the white people were because I didn't like being around Black people. The point I'm making here is that began a period of real loneliness, all because of how people react to race and when inequality is at work. What I discovered through time is that, yes, getting a good education is supposed to mean that you get to live the American dream, and I'm certainly not one who can complain, but I have seen all too often that following the rules does not always equal the results that are promised. You know, during my middle years, I benefited from the civil rights movement. When I joined the federal government, I was one of a few minorities. And as the government took steps to become more diverse, it was wonderful to be part of that process, even though it was clear that not everybody was in favor of it. I learned through those years what it meant to navigate a white-centric workplace. What's that? Well, culturally or otherwise, there are differences between white people and Black people. It's a cultural thing. And what I discovered is, as a Black man, I had to be very, very careful about expressing myself in an assertive manner. I developed a phrase, you gotta be careful not to scare the white people. And that was literally true, because strength, often expressed in the tone of voice and some body language done by a white male, just seemed to have been perceived different when compared to myself and other Black men. So this journey that I've been on in learning what it means to live in white America, to be in the conference room or even the boardroom that's controlled and operated by white America, I had to learn how to live and persist in that environment. And it's been an interesting journey. Of course, along the way, I was blessed with increasing responsibilities, getting promoted up. I can't tell you how many times the question came whether I got the position because of merit versus an EEO agenda. And so not only having to work hard and take care of business in order to qualify for a position, but then having to deal with being judged that I still didn't deserve that position. It's just an EEO agenda at work. You know, I often chuckle about during the years in uniform. So I was a commissioned officer of the United States Public Health Service, active duty officer, wore my uniform daily. And I'd go to conferences and mostly white veterinarians in particular. And, you know, I could be walking along and people would see me coming and they'd smile and greet. And boy, I was just like, wow, it's good. Maybe things are changing. End of day, take off the uniform to go get dinner. And meeting those same people on the sidewalk, and they didn't even see me. I came to appreciate what they saw was a uniform, and that allowed them to acknowledge my presence there. But I really started to see myself as largely invisible, actually, in the white culture. And of course, too often at the hotel, waiting at the front door for the taxi. I can't tell you how many times usually it's a little old lady, walking up to me, asking me if I would help her with her bags. Now, what she saw was a black man in a uniform. All these ribbons and rank and everything just didn't occur. So over the years, I came to appreciate what it means to integrate into a white society, and that there are so many nuances at work that too often translate into either not being seen or subtle messages of not belonging, or you ought to be thankful you're here because you certainly didn't earn your way here. During my middle career, of course, I had many occasions to be the first or the only minority on a committee, on a board, or in a given situation. And through time, you know, it became one of those things where I didn't walk into that room expecting to see people of color, because after a while, it becomes clear that people of color were still not showing up, at least in the important rooms, if you would. And that bothers me, you know, that I started to become desensitized to even expecting to see minorities present. That bothers me because, I don't know, is that whitewashing or is that something else? Whatever it is, I hope to never lose my sensitivity to racial injustice, lack of inequality and inclusion, diversity. In my later years, I started to come to terms with the path that I just briefly described. It was like really peeling off the scab. And when I peeled off the scab, I actually had to pick at it a little bit because that thing had been embedded there for so long. What I discovered was, wow, I've been living a lonely existence, navigating a white culture, being invisible, being not fully appreciated, those microaggressions that we hear about, or other subtle and sometimes not so subtle messages. I discovered in pulling off that scab that there was a lot of pain that had been there for years. And, you know, when we think about, well, how do you survive in nature? How do you adapt? How do you overcome odds like we're talking about here? Well, you bury them, you push them deeper. At least that's what I found that I had done. And having those pains start to surface was a very good thing. It was a very therapeutic thing. But it was pain at the same time. And also discovered sadness, a deep degree of sadness. Now, mind you, these things that I'm discovering as I pull off the scab, they were buried, and I believe they were a form of self-defense, you know, how to get up each day and go into the work that needed to be done and not be overcome or certainly undermined significantly by a reality in which I was trying to make a difference in the world. The sadness was related to hate. You know, I still struggle with, how do you hate someone you don't even know? Well, I heard about them. How do you hate someone that you don't even know? And then there was sadness about the amount of indifference that exists in our society, that while there are so many that I've met and worked with along the way, white colleagues, who I would not regard as hateful toward myself or minorities, there was definitely a measured indifference. And so I concluded that what I've experienced, what we, people who look like me, are experiencing is beyond a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing. And I was reminded of Ephesians 6:12, King James version of that verse, which says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Now, I'm not calling all white people wicked, mind you. I'm saying that human behavior is beyond what we perceive intellectually. It's at a much deeper level that we are defined as a species. We're social, we're mental, we're emotional, we're also spiritual beings. And that intellectually understanding inequality is one thing, and it's an important thing. But embracing the unfairness of inequality is a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual thing. I'd like to just conclude by saying, you know what? Being a black man has its value. You see, along the way, that journey that I just briefly touched upon, I had to develop certain strengths. Some were belief in oneself, being able to pull myself up by the bootstraps, more or less, and to chin up and chest out and proceed with that mission in spite of stuff that would undermine my ability to be successful. So I grew strength out of these adversities. I'm a stronger person in certain respects because I've had to live as a black man in America. And then, of course, being able to mentally and emotionally embrace the idea of achieving success in life in spite of those barriers. You know, there's something that comes back to me as an individual that affirms who I am and what I am, to be able to look back and see that. Achieving in spite of rather than because of is something that I am happy that I can say I enjoy knowing about. And then finally, of course, when the rules don't favor you, and let's just say along the way, yes, I've been presented with some extra hurdles, or maybe I had to bend over a little bit further backwards to make a point to be taken seriously. It taught me to be prepared, to really prepare, to go in there having done my homework and ready to go. Because see, I'm not going to necessarily get a free ride. I'm not going to be cut a little slack necessarily. And I said all that by also wanting to say, these things may not be as much racism, which is based on hate, as indifference and sensitivity, lack of cultural competence, and so forth. And so I'm happy to be part of this town hall. I'm looking forward to our discussion, and I hope to learn, and I hope to share more that might help others to understand it's spiritual, and we can do better as a people, as a human race. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
I don't know if WesternU can do anything about the racism, discrimination, and bigotry that we will be faced with for years to come. I say that because it's within the CVM faculty.
I don't think any courses centered around diversity and inclusion or combating racism should be led by white faculty. The message comes across differently, and I would prefer to be taught such an important and loaded subject by someone who has experienced firsthand, not just someone who sympathizes and supports.
Dr. Ruby Perry is the Dean of the Tuskegee University College of Veterinary Medicine and the first female to serve in that role. Dr. Perry is a graduate of Tuskegee University, where she earned a BS degree in Animal and Poultry Science in 1976 and the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree in 1977. She earned an MS degree in microbiology from Michigan State University, where she also conducted a residency program in veterinary radiology. At Tuskegee since 2007, she has served as a faculty member, acting chair of the Department of Small Animal Medicine, Surgery and Radiology, interim chief of staff in the Office of the President, associate dean for academic affairs, and vice provost of undergraduate education. Dr. Perry is a two-term president of the Tuskegee Veterinary Medical Alumni Association and the first African-American female board-certified veterinary radiologist in the American College of Veterinary Radiology. Here's her story.
It is an honor to give my perspective on race in veterinary medicine. Of course, one cannot give a perspective if there is no foundation on which to build it. As an African-American female growing up in the deep South of Mississippi, I was actively engaged in civil rights as a youngster. I remember the many rallies and town hall meetings with our community of parents, getting mentally and emotionally prepared to send their children to face the challenges of changing the landscape of segregation in the South. In addition, it was critical to identify those youngsters from middle school to high school who could survive mentally and academically in a white school system. Thus, the training of survival began. It was important that we remain focused on the goal of why we were selected. It sort of felt special in an odd kind of way, but the memories that I have to bear remains a chronic stressor for me to this day. I reflect on being pulled from high school of friends and moved to an all-white high school because it was essential to end segregation. Did I understand at that time? No. But my mother just said that you must go and you cannot fail. What a burden to bear. But I do not regret the lessons learned along the way, the valued friendships that I gained, and the many mentors and supporters who remain in my professional and personal life. So this has been my platform throughout my professional journey of being an impactful advocate for change. Racism is a difficult subject to talk about. My discipline as a radiologist and my profession as a veterinarian are easy subjects to have a discussion and a conversation around because of my love and compassion for both. Race, on the other hand, comes with reflections of pain and suffering in the context of which I am presenting. Thus, I must give my opinion on race and racism in general before I can address it in my beloved profession. Am I proud to be who I am? Absolutely. I am proud to be a female, and I'm proud to be Black. I have an option to change my gender, but I don't have an option to change my DNA. However, even as proud as I am, it is difficult for even me to have a discussion around race and racism. Having experienced its impact sometimes caused me to wonder about the intentions of those who say they're colorblind or truly want to make a difference with solving the world's ills of social injustice due to the color of one's skin, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, age, social class, physical ability or attributes, national origin, political beliefs, or sexual orientation. So I think about our wonderful Declaration of Independence that was written on July 4, 1776, that I remember memorizing in secondary education. In the second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, first of all, the presidents and those writing the Constitution had slaves. Were they really talking about all people or just those in power? Since the slaves who were Black people were considered property and were sold as such. According to the 2019 Pew Research Center report, more than 150 years after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States, the majority of Black people in the United States feel that the legacy of slavery continues to have an impact on the position of Black people in American society today. Yes, Black people are free, but never forget the generational scars from being enslaved and even today not having access to appropriate health care and education, wealth, or power. As an educated Black woman in this country, I am always conscious of racial inequality and have experiences that keep reminding me that race and racism are alive and well in the United States. Being followed in a high-end store because you're targeted as the shoplifter, when the real person has done the deed and gone out the door, and probably not the Black person. Being ignored in a women's department store when you ask for help, and being careful not to cause a disturbance because you could be charged with disturbing the peace. Just a few of many, and reminds me of the words from my mother. Remember what you learned to survive in a world filled with hate and supremacy. Look in the mirror every day and reflect on who you are and know your boundaries and your limitations. Well, I pay taxes and held accountable to the same standards of governmental agencies as other citizens. Then why is it that I do not get the same opportunities as my white counterparts? Why is it that it seems as if there is a secret to having wealth and power and only share it with a select group? Why do people take advantage of others for them to stay empowered? Now that is a greed discussion. But when you hear it in underserved or impoverished communities, especially low-income housing, it clearly projects the social injustice with people of color, especially Blacks. Race relations will continue to be in the forefront of society until people not only acknowledge, but also accept racial equality. I believe this is where the difficulties occur with these kinds of conversations, because people truly do not see each other as equal. According to the 2019 Pew Research Center survey, about 50% of Blacks say it's unlikely that the country will actually achieve racial equality. With the resurfacing of racial injustice and civil unrest from the unjustified murder of unarmed Black men and women over the past months, emphasizes the gloomy picture of this country's racial progress. It's like a roller coaster of emotions, anger, and fear. Emotions that center around pain and suffering of others or experiences that we have had ourselves. There were probably times when many of us have observed or were intimately involved in incidents that were unfair, or incidents caused suffering with pain and anxiety due to injustice in some form, whether in your community or in the workplace. These incidences are not just around Black Lives Matter, but as Blacks in this country, we are the target race of injustice and has been for centuries. Anger occurs when feelings of helplessness and despair. Anger is an emotional response that we have to have an external or an internal stimulus or an event that we perceive to be a threat, a violation to self, or an injustice. Anger then triggers a response of action that may not have been the best outcome. Seeing or hearing of a loved one killed with no justified reason causes anger and lack of trust in the system of justice. Black people share that pain more often than not. As for me, when I reflect on the struggles that I went through with desegregation, I realized that I was harboring displaced anger or chronic anger for not being able to graduate from high school with my friends. That I was on a mission to correct a wrong. It was not until 30 years later when my white classmates actually invited the 6 Black students in my class back to a high school reunion. It was then that the 2 of us who were still living were able to experience an apology for what they put us through. Finally, we sung in the choir that the choir director said to us, "You would never sing in this school choir." The school principal who said that he had no support for us to graduate from high school. A labor of love for justice that we endured, and thankful for the support from our families and community that we survived and can share these stories. Fear is also an emotion of helplessness. It pained me to worry about my 2 sons when they were growing up in the South to return home when they left for after-school activities, or anytime they left the house, with fear and worry of them returning home safe. Yet, I had to let them live their young lives. But for sure, I had to teach them survival in a system of injustice with targeting of young African-American boys and African-American males during the Driving While Black movement. That same fear surfaced when, during the protest of injustice for the killing of George Floyd and others a few months ago, a KKK cross was burned on the side of Interstate 85, the route that I used to get to work. As a college family, I implemented a 3-part series to reach out to our students, faculty, and staff to have conversations on society, injustice, racism, and health. I invited a group of panelists to lead the discussions as we navigated the current state of the coronavirus pandemic, further compromised by the additional impact from social ills of injustice, racism, and the impact on the health of people, in particular, African Americans. There were emotions of fear, anger, and helplessness. Overall, the discussions ended on the third session with how do we continue the conversations and reach out to each other for support and encouragement. Veterinary medicine is a discipline labeled as the whitest healthcare profession in the United States. Is that a reflection of a profession dominated by a dominant race? I think not. But it's going to take all of us to make the change needed in our society and our beloved profession. We are taught in the veterinary medicine profession to care for our clients and the pets as family members. We can have that same kind of compassion and caring for each other to be advocates of change. Thank you.
I would like to have WesternU admit to racism, discrimination, and bigotry both ways. I would like to know that the best person is admitted, hired, promoted, and not the best person of a particular race. I know of too many incidents where not the best person, but the person of the right color or race was hired.
As a gay woman, I am of course always appreciative of inclusive speech. That being said, in this moment, I believe that Black lives and Black voices need to take center stage.
Stop talking about humanism and start living humanism at WesternU.
I want to introduce you Dr. Nelson. Dr. Philip D. Nelson earned a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Jackson State University in 1980, a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from Tuskegee Institute in 1979, and a Doctor of Philosophy from North Carolina State University, Immunology and Biotechnology in 1993. Dr. Nelson has had an active career in teaching, research, and academic veterinary medicine. His research has focused on feline leukemia and feline immunodeficiency virus infection in cats as biological models for human HIV, and the development in immunity in the dog and cats. He has served as Associate Dean, Professor of Academic and Public Affairs, and Interim Dean at the College of Veterinary Medicine at Mississippi State University, and as Acting Head, Department of Small Animal Medicine, Surgery, and Radiology at Tuskegee University School of Veterinary Medicine. In 2005, he became Executive Associate Dean for Preclinical Programs of the College of Veterinary Medicine here at Western University of Health Sciences. In 2007, he became the Dean of our College of Veterinary Medicine here at WesternU. He is a past member of the Educational Commission for Foreign Veterinary Graduates of the American Veterinary Medical Association, and is a consultant on diversity and member of the Multicultural Affairs Committee of the Medical Association of the Association of the American Veterinary Medical Colleges, AAVMC. As a member of the AAVMC, Dr. Nelson served as the chair of the Advocacy Committee and on the Finance Committee as Assistant Treasurer. Dr. Nelson served as president of the AAVMC from July of 2017 through March of 2018. Dr. Nelson is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Northern Award for Distinguished Teaching in Veterinary Medicine and the Pegasus Award for Distinguished Clinical Instruction at Mississippi State University, Distinguished Alumni Award from Tuskegee University, and the John Payne Industry Leadership Award. Please watch Dr. Nelson video.
I was raised in the southern states of Alabama and Mississippi. And the first story I'd like to tell you is the story of my family going out to dinner on a Sunday evening. Now, going out to dinner on a Sunday evening in Jackson, Mississippi for an African-American family in the 1960s was a lot different than my taking my family to dinner on a Sunday evening here in California or anywhere else in the United States at this time. Our cultures were segregated. Our churches were segregated. Our schools were segregated. Our businesses were segregated. I was not allowed to walk into a JCPenney's and buy merchandise and walk back out through the front door. I was not allowed to go to any restaurant in Jackson unless it was Black owned. And the only upscale restaurant that we felt comfortable going to in Jackson, Mississippi was a restaurant called Stephen's Kitchen, which was on Farris Street in the Black part of town. Anyway, we were enjoying Sunday dinner when I noticed a commotion at the front door. And I noticed a tall man walking through the restaurant being followed by a number of people who were patting him on his back and shaking his hands and treating him like a celebrity. And I looked and noticed my father was in awe of this man. Now, my father was 6'2", and this man was about the same height. I thought they were the biggest people I'd ever seen. As the man passed the table, the man said, Good afternoon, Mr. Nelson. And my father replied, good afternoon, Mr. Evers. It's good to see you. And as he walked past, my dad turned to me and said, Phil, do you know who that was? That was Medgar Evers. Now, I was 6 or 7 years of age. I didn't know who Medgar Evers was. I didn't know what he did. But I knew my father was in awe of him. About a week later, I was walking through my living room and my father was sitting in his chair crying, watching the news. We had just discovered that Medgar Evers had been shot in his driveway. It was then that I decided to find out who Medgar Evers was. Of course, I didn't have to do that on my own. My father was going to make sure I understood who Medgar Evers was and what he was to us. Medgar Evers was the president of the Mississippi chapter of the NAACP. He fought hard for the right to vote for African Americans. My father was going to make sure I understood the importance of voting. He took me downtown 3 times to register to vote. He finally got registered despite having to take tests that were never graded, just marked failed, or having to guess the number of marbles in a jar, while the whole time other people seemed to just register by saying they wanted to register. I'm not sure I knew it then. I knew it was unfair, but I'm not sure I understood the role that government had to play in enforcing that unfairness. My father finally registered to vote, and he was proud that he played the game before the Voting Rights Act actually gave him the right to vote. I applied to vet school after going to Jackson State for a couple of years, and I applied to 3 schools. One was Tuskegee. I won't name the other 2, but of course the other 2 were predominantly white schools. Within a month after my application, I received a phone call from one of the schools, from a staff member of one of the schools. She asked to speak to Philip Nelson. I told him that I was he. And she said, "You applied to veterinary school here?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "Well, you have a fine application, but we won't be accepting you. You are a Negro, right?" I confirmed that I was African American. She then said, "Well, I called because I want to make sure you knew that there was a school for you and your kind." When I asked her what school that might be, she informed me that Tuskegee was perfect for me. I thanked her for her time, and we hung up. After I graduated from Tuskegee, I had the good fortune of graduating at a time when the College of Veterinary Medicine was being established at Mississippi State University. One of the contributors to the establishment of that college was a Black veterinarian, Dr. Roland Powell, who insisted that there be Black representation on faculty. I was a little nonplussed because I thought I was going to be working with Dr. Powell at graduation. Instead, I was contacted by the dean and asked to apply because Dr. Powell had recommended that I apply. I couldn't pass a chance to see the establishment of a new veterinary school. I had a wonderful time in the college. It wasn't so great in the community. When I first moved in, I had nothing. My wife and I had been renting. And so we decided to buy refrigerators, stoves, etc. And I believed in spending my money locally. So I went to the local Sears store, which was nothing but a mail order office, filled out an application for a Sears card so that I could buy the appliances we needed for our new home. When I submitted my application to the lady at the desk, she looked at me and she said, "It says here you work at Mississippi State University." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "What do you do there? Are you the janitor?" And I said, "No, I'm an assistant professor." She said, "In what college?" And I said, "In the College of Veterinary Medicine." She said, "There is no College of Veterinary Medicine." I said, "Yes, there is. It's new. It's only been there for less than a year. I would understand why you wouldn't know about it." She said, "I don't believe you." She said, "What do you really do at Mississippi State?" And I said, "Well, you don't have to believe me. Sears has to believe me. And if they don't believe me, they can check the records." Fast forward 3 years later, and as a clinical academician, I was on duty in the hospital. And as I went over the cases with my students, I noticed that one of the cases was a dachshund with intervertebral disc disease. And so I assigned the student to that case and said, "We need to see this one first. I don't know how serious it might be, but this one may need surgery immediately." So I sent the student in to do a physical exam and history. She came and got me and introduced me to the owner. And the owner just happened to be the same lady I had had numerous encounters with at the Sears mail order store. I was immediately intimidated because I hoped she would not think that I would allow our relationship to affect my treatment of her dog. But something worse happened. She didn't even recognize me. My white coat blinded her to who I really was. And the pain of her dog blinded her to who I really was. The student introduced me to her as Dr. Nelson and said, Dr. Nelson, this is what I found. And she went through her routine. I then realized that she really did not know who I was. And so I finished my exam. I explained to her what I thought we needed to do. I took her through a step-by-step process on how we were going to confirm where the lesion was, and then told her what we needed to do to correct it. When I informed her that her dog would need surgery and that I would schedule the surgery that afternoon, and I gave her an estimate of the treatment, she looked at me and said, but Dr. Nelson, I can't pay that. And my response was, don't worry, we'll figure out a payment plan for you. You'll just have to apply for it, our credit rating, and we'll figure this out. At that point, I couldn't hold it any longer. And I said, I'm sorry, but do you recognize me? Do you know who I am? And she started to shake her head, and then the realization was suddenly appeared in her eyes. And I could tell she didn't know what to say. And so I just hugged her and said, we're going to take good care of your dog. Invisibility for Black professionals is common. It works both ways. I have so much I could share. There are a lot of stories I could tell you, but probably the last story I'd like to share is the story that I think made us all aware. George Floyd's death is not the first time a Black man has died at the knee or gun or hands of the police. Black Lives Matters is a concept, an idea that simply cries at the statistics that say that interventions and interactions between police and African Americans have all too often resulted in violence and death. What was horrible about George Floyd's death, and ironic for a veterinarian and for the veterinary profession to observe, is that George Floyd died a death that we wouldn't put our patients through. Veterinary medicine practices euthanasia, humane euthanasia, all the time. We treat our patients better than George Floyd was treated for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That was the horror. But even more horrible than that is the knowledge that that's been going on for years, for centuries, and only now do we find it abhorrent. The police has a vital role in our society, but because of the policing strategies, because of the tendrils of institutional racism that has been wrapped around those strategies as part of government and institutional expressions of racism, the African American community feels the purpose of policing is to keep us in our communities, to protect the rest of the city from our community. And in doing so, they have the authority, the right, indeed the need to control our communities. When I am stopped by a policeman for a suspected traffic violation, I hope that all I get is a ticket. Many of you probably hope you don't get a ticket. But if I am able to drive away with a ticket, my experiences suggest that I was lucky. My life's experiences says I was lucky I wasn't asked out of the car before I was asked for my driver's license. I was lucky if I was not asked to put my hands on the hood. I was lucky if I was not asked if it's okay to search my car. I was lucky that I wasn't asked to hold my temper when all I had committed was a traffic violation. It is important that you understand the withering, pernicious, chronic effect of lifelong racism. You've seen the signs, the historical signs of white and black bathrooms in the South. Just another example of government enforcement of institutional expressions of racism. It is not easy to share these kind of stories without the knowledge and the intent to give you a different perspective. Those historical signs by themselves are meaningless. It is the enforcement. It is the emotion. It is the hatred behind the signs that you must understand. And as much as the Civil Rights Act of 1965 and the Voter Rights Act of 1965 changed my life, you can't legislate hearts. Being a veterinarian does not protect me from racism. Being a dean of a college of veterinary medicine does not protect me from racism. My accomplishments are invisible in the community. I hope this has been helpful. I want to thank you again for attending this event.
As I do appreciate you all trying to bring light to this subject and create a safe space on campus, at the end of the day, I have to be proud of who I am, where my family came from, and what I want to represent. Some people will accept me and others will not. I just choose to work with those who accept who I am and leave those that have opinion about what I represent. I would instead change your stance and think about celebrating different cultures and backgrounds. Create awareness about loving yourself and accepting yourself for who you are and not to be ashamed of it.
Stress that we are all human first. Strongly foster the sense of family. Help strengthen the bond between us all. Facilitate anti-racism with a sincere and powerful message of inclusion for all. The diversity within our college, among students, staff, and faculty is amazing. We should embrace and celebrate our diverse family.
Well, I have to say, in preparation for this event, several of the team, we watched each of your videos several times, and it just gets more powerful every time we watch it. Thank you all for sharing and being so authentic with us. So we're pleased to have our storytellers with us this evening, and I'm more than honored to moderate this session. And we're going to start with one question per guest, and then we were going to move on to questions from the audience. Given time constraints, we may not be able to answer every question, but we are going to do our best. So I will start with a question for Dr. Blackwell. You described the struggle to present yourself differently among different groups of people. Some people refer to this as code switching. How has that dynamic changed over the course of your life, and your careers, your many careers, and is it something you still struggle with today?
Well, thank you for the question. It is still ever present. I am well aware that what my parents taught me as a kid still holds true, and that was that, well, you just can't go out and do things the same way they do and get away with it or be accepted as okay. And in my professional life, what I have observed too many times is the moment of assertiveness to make a point, and especially when some emotion is behind the assertion, gets interpreted, it appears too often as aggression. And so it became very important for me through time to recognize that I needed to regulate how I speak to others. And I know some might say, well, we all have to do that. No, I'm saying as a Black man in America, it's different. And there's no better example of that than what Dean Nelson referred to as policing in America. Yes, I have that same experience when the lights turn on behind me. And there have been many times when that's been unfair. But where the hands are, how one speaks back, how I respond to questions, all is quite staged in order to be safe. And again, back in the workplace, sometimes staged in order to not scare people, just because of the need to show leadership and be assertive in a moment. So it's still here with me.
Dr. Perry, why do you think the applicant pool for veterinary colleges, veterinary programs, has a less than representative number of Blacks, as is the general population? What are your thoughts about that?
So thank you, Dr. Kovacs, for that question. And I think about that often, and in part of my role as a dean, in terms of what can I do to help be in the whitest profession? Why are the numbers still low? Why we haven't moved that needle? So I think about many students of color are not aware of the veterinary profession, or that veterinary medicine is actually a career choice or a career option. And it goes back to parents as well. You know, parents are great recruiters. And as loving parents, they want their children to, pursue a career that they know that they can receive the kind of mentoring and support so that they can graduate and enjoy their experience so that they can be proud of them. So when parents are talking to their children and let's just say there's a career fair, and the child have loved animals all their life. They want to be an animal doctor. And they come home and they go tell the parents, and the parents, okay, well, let me research that, as smart parents do. Let me research that. And what do they come up with? What do they research? If you're in a certain state, you find a veterinary college in your state. Well, you would want your child to go to that state because they want to stay home or close to family. But then they don't get the kind of numbers that they want, and so they feel uncomfortable with that. So number one is parents are good recruiters. There is a limited number of advocates, a limited number of champions for change who are dedicated, are committed to educating and training students of color or youth of color, so that students of color in the veterinary schools have a story to tell. So they had a good shared experience. Of course, you're going to call someone who knows a veterinarian, and then those persons become great recruiters as well. Well, if you're not having very many graduates from that particular state school, then you don't have those persons that serve as recruiters, and therefore the numbers remain low. There are underlying prejudices that Blacks are inferior and not smart enough to remain a viable part and is a viable part of institutional racism. Well, you got three people right here, folk of color, who have achieved. I want to comment on a comment that Dr. Nelson made in his journey, but Dr. Blackwell made as well, is as a person of color, we have achieved, but it's never good enough in the eyes of our white counterparts, many, and it's still not good enough. And I share a story is that a friend of mine, I have achieved much more, and we were in a place. Do you know they selected her? She's white. They selected her, and she had to tell them, "Oh, I just finished high school." Those are those prejudices, those underlying prejudices that you Black, so you probably never got past high school. And so until we get over those kinds of prejudices and be committed as advocates of change to change those numbers, then we will still have low enrollment.
Yeah, it seems like a difficult, you're dealing with a lot of barriers, not just the prejudice and the faulty notions that people have held, but the lack of representation. If all you see are white veterinarians out there on TV and movies, or just out there in your neighborhood, then that's going to be another barrier, because then you don't see people like yourself. Role models, role modeling and mentoring, very important, I understand. Thank you for your answer. Dr. Nelson, so according to others, Tuskegee was perfect for you. And while you enjoyed your time at Tuskegee, the choice of what was perfect didn't appear to be your own choice. So if a Black baby is born today and they want to be a veterinarian, how do you see the difference between their journey and the one that you took?
Well, first let me say Tuskegee was perfect for me, and it was my choice, even though I didn't have another choice. Mm-hmm. I'm very happy to be a Tuskegee alum, but I'm an optimistic person, and I'm also optimistic about my grandchildren and the different road that they have before them than I have. If any of my grandchildren decided to become a veterinarian, and Amaya, I hope you do, But if any of them decided to become a veterinarian, one of the things that I am encouraged by is the makeup of the protesters that we see now, compared to the makeup of the protesters that we saw when I was a kid. During the Civil Rights Movement, there were whites involved, but they were usually clergymen. They were of other religions. And there were others as well, but this makeup is truly, these protests are truly made up of America. And it's largely because of the fact that my children, who are largely represented in these groups, were raised in an integrated society. And because of their experiences, their shared experiences, and the myths and stereotypes and racial superstitions don't hold water as much. I hold to the belief that it's even better for my grandchildren. But that doesn't eliminate the challenges that we have in unraveling the institutional web of support for legal biases and the institutional support for personal biases and personal and group advantages that we get. So, when I applied to vet school, they were actively discouraging, if not denying, women and people of color from going to vet school. There were different arguments for each, but it was an active denial. I'm very pleased to say that now that I'm among the Dean's Club, that that has changed. When I entered veterinary school and when I first entered law administration, there were deans that were actively fighting against integration, fighting against equal opportunity, or at least insisting on quality applicants, which was code at that time, for making sure that no one got through unless they were absolutely qualified. So I'm optimistic. I'm pleased about the changes that have been made without losing sight of the changes that still must be made.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a few questions here. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to them all. I'm going to ask one from an anonymous attendee. The quote, "Being non-Black means not having to think about this stuff." Speak to why this statement is bad for veterinary medicine.
Well, I'll start, and then I hope my colleagues join in. I've been having a number of conversations with one of my white colleagues. And when I mentioned how the Voting Rights Act transformed my life, largely because of the story I told you about how my perspective of the Voting Rights Act and how important it was, and how I saw how suddenly, once we had a voice in politics, we actually had a little power in changing our own condition. We didn't recognize, however, that we needed to make changes in the economic arena as well at the time. I think we overvalued but the role of voting in politics, but it was definitely important. But I was shocked when the response that came back was, didn't even cause a ripple in my life. And the shock was, he was just being honest. He wasn't trying to be coy or cruel or anything else. It was actually a self-revelation to him. He didn't know how important it was to us because he didn't have to think about it. Now, you don't have to think about whether or not a policy represents everybody justly or not, that someone votes for. If you don't have to think about the fact that only half the country gets to vote, which was the case when women didn't have the vote, and so every policy may not necessarily benefit them. If you don't have to think about that, then it's easier to pass laws that are not justifiable. And that's the if you don't have to think about it. It's that the power of omission is almost as powerful as the power of commission, especially if you allow injustices to stand once you learn about it.
I don't need to add much, Dr. Kovac, to that. I can say to the person who made that comment is find your purpose in life. If it's not for making a difference, you know, we often have to think about that actually. Everybody has a purpose in making life better, making a difference. Somehow, life is, there's areas of life, even in your path, you made think about who you had mentored or made an impact on. That was a purpose. Not that this is not stuff. This is life. And think about your purpose.
Thank you. There's a question here from Beth, and I'm selfishly choosing this because it's one that I struggle with as well. As a white and liberal inclusive person, I've been reading books to help understand, such as The New Jim Crow and How to Be an Anti-Racist. How do I be a strong ally and mentor for my students of color? The messages for many minority students is to be stronger and better, as you each mentioned, but we lost so many talented people along the way. What should our advice be now?
Well, I'll jump in with a bit of an answer. So thank you, Beth, for doing the work of becoming better informed. I strongly believe that when one has a heart for others, and teachers are supposed to be those type of folks who have a heart for others, you ask yourself, well, what motivates you to do what you do? And I would hope that teachers would get way down the list before they start to consider race and ethnicity as somehow a criteria for how well they do their job. I will like to connect my comment, though, with what was said earlier and put it a little differently. I still remark when when a white person says to me, I didn't know all this was going on. And I will give that person the benefit of the doubt, but it does beg the question, well, where have you been? You must work really hard to live in denial, what I think is denial about what's going on around you. Either that, or you truly do believe that I'm less capable because I'm Black. And so thank you, Beth, for preparing yourself better to have this conversation and to be a positive influence.
Thank you.
And any opportunity for her, Michael, to be an advocate, a learning moment and a teachable moment, let her continue to do that. Somebody has to be on the road of change. And we have a lot of champions of change. Some of them are real quiet. I remember my training when I was at Michigan State on, and I never forget this, you don't stop telling the story, you don't stop teaching and learning along the way. And if you can just impact one, just one at a time. And then it reminds me as educators for our students, how we feel and how we are inspired when our students get it. We can remember that, and the students as well. It's the same thing. You teach, you stand on it, and you stay firm, you don't waver, and you keep doing it. And eventually, over time, the person who you thought would never get it, gets it. That's all you can do. And I just reflect on what Dr. Nelson said in terms of you can't legislate the hearts. But I truly believe that hearts can change and people change. But you got to keep saying that message over and over again. I've been standing on it for a long time, since I was a little girl. I have not wavered, and I don't plan on wavering because I understand my purpose. And I enjoy my journey.
Oh, there's so many good questions coming, but we don't have a lot of time left. So I'm going to ask one that kind of encompasses several of them. What is the biggest mistake that veterinary schools make in terms of being attractive to Black applicants? This is from an anonymous attendee.
Can you repeat that question again?
Sure, I can do that. What is the biggest mistake that veterinary schools make in terms of being attractive to Black applicants? Or I guess in terms of trying to recruit Black applicants?
Well, see, Dr. Perry can't answer that question because she's very successful in attracting Black applicants.
I had to find the answer.
So, oh, I'm sorry. Mike, my lights just went off. I got to turn back on.
Okay.
Well, are you back?
Yeah, I am.
Go ahead.
So I think probably the biggest challenge, I won't classify it as a mistake, but the biggest challenge is to understand the social and cultural needs of Black, Hispanic, people of color who come to our institutions. If we only have 4% of our applicants coming to an environment that only has 2% of the people that look like them, and if all of that 2% happens to be in the faculty, then who are they going to socialize with? You know, yes, they came to learn to be professionals, but there needs to be a support structure for them while they're going through veterinary school. Yes, we want them to learn how to be culturally aware, but there needs to be a psychological safety net that they can trust while they're there. Simply admitting them is not good enough. It's just the first step. And so not being prepared to take every student throughout the educational process. And oh, by the way, this applies to white students too. You know, it's just that it's easier for white students because 90% of the class or 60% of the class happen to be that look like them. The 100 Black men has a motto: what they see is what they'll be. And it goes back to Dr. Kovacs, your statement about mentoring and role modeling. But sometimes we can take that so far that we can't see the modeling that occurs from a person unlike us. And that's the challenge that we all have. We are all on the road of understanding human behavior. And it is And probably the one lesson we need to learn about racism is that it's a false entity. One way or another, you should not buy into it. But human beings still need support. And so if there's, and I'm not sure if I have the answer, but at least I understand what the problem is. And once we understand the problem, we have hope to find an answer.
Absolutely, thank you. Dr. Blackwell, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Just to say, during my tenure at the University of Tennessee, the college was 25 years old when I became dean, had graduated 4 Black students. During a 7.5-year period as dean, we more than doubled that number of graduates. And why? We intended to graduate Black students. That's part of this equation. You must intend to be diverse. In nature, things are not generally static. You're moving in one direction or the other. There's dynamic activity going on all the time. And I'm simply saying those organizations, industries that have chosen to be diverse are diverse. The ones that haven't chosen are not. It's really not that complicated. Now, that said, in fairness, the pipeline is an issue. And I often say veterinarians need to add our voice to the larger conversation in America about oppression and disadvantaged communities. Some of these students who are brilliant would make some of the best veterinarians are in schools that are struggling for lack of resources and so forth. So it is a complex issue, but the solution starts when the day we choose to be more diverse.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It has to be intentional. If it happened on its own, it would have happened already. And that doesn't happen without intention. Wow, thank you. For the sake of time, we're going to have to leave the questions, but we apologize to those who we didn't have time to ask your questions, but they will be included in our report, so we will have them, and they will perhaps spur future events. And we encourage you also to consider joining our future conversations and hopefully generate your own discussions with others and continue to keep asking your questions. On behalf of our team and our CVM family, I want to thank you all for generously giving your time to tell your stories and join us this evening. You have taken on the burden that is all too commonly put on Black people and people of color to educate others. That is not overlooked, and we really, really appreciate that. For the audience, please look for a survey that we will be sending out shortly. We will be asking for your feedback about the event as well as your ideas for future events. And this will also be a way to give us your contact information if you would like to request a certificate of attendance for CE. And I will shortly turn it over to Dr. Nelson, but just wanted to say a few things. One of James Baldwin's most famous quotes reads, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And we might have recently heard Chris Rock quote that on Saturday Night Live 2 weeks ago. We acknowledge that most of the people listening today are veterinarians or veterinary students, and I know you all know what it is like to do things that are difficult and uncomfortable. We are hoping that we all want change badly enough that we will be willing to make the commitment required, the commitment to have louder and more uncomfortable conversations. We look forward to having this with you all in the future. Thank you.
I agree with everything voiced by all the individuals in the video. I absolutely agree that yes, we all have to be anti-racist, and I want to do more towards that result. However, I admit that I'm scared, very scared. I understand the confusion and dismay voiced by the dean at Wisconsin, and that I'm afraid to misstep, to anger somebody I'm trying to help, to be called out as somebody who is on the other side, when that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm paralyzed because I'm now afraid that I'll say or do the wrong thing. That can't be a reason for me not to act. But just like everybody else, I need understanding right now. What can I do?
What can I do? What can we do? We must first seek to understand not just the topic or the issue, but each other. We must then recognize and acknowledge the obstacles that have divided us, imprisoned us, and diminished us. We must commit to changing our status quo for the better, starting with the recognition that passive acceptance of egregious wrongs is tantamount to creating and committing that egregious wrong. We're on this road together. I too have a lot to learn. I don't necessarily believe in cultural competency. I believe in cultural awareness. I'm not sure I've ever met a person who's completely cultural competent. But regardless, it is time for a real conversation at the grassroots level. Real change requires real talk. I'd like to think that maybe we've just begun. This was just the first topic we chose to address for obvious reasons. The social justice planning team will be planning subsequent events to further the conversation within the CVM family in smaller groups and based on your responses to the survey we'll be sending you on other topics. If you are as committed as you say, you'll help us by responding. A conversation takes a minimum of two. A robust conversation reflects the community. A word about humanism. I recently bought a electric toothbrush, and the toothbrush had all these options: clean, gum care, sensitive, something else, and then deep clean. You'd think clean was enough. We seem to be a society that loves to have options. It's not good enough unless we have options. You know, the Declaration of Independence begins with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." Unalienable rights. That's a word I still struggle with, but I do know what it means. It means that these rights can't be severed by laws, prejudice, governmental shenanigans, presidential edicts, or individuals. They're absolute, universal, and pervasive. And they're not optional. No one has the option to deny my humanity, regardless of the color of my skin. No one has the option or the power to take away, abuse, or deny my unalienable rights. So we've come to the end of this program. Now, in the beginning of the program, I told you that this was not an opportunity for incrimination, finger pointing, or accusations. And then we followed with a seemingly dark, dystopian, historical picture of race relations in America. Let me be clear. When it comes to race and race relations, our history is dark and dystopic, particularly from a Black perspective. We weren't finger pointing. We were simply being accurate. The events of the past can't be changed, shouldn't be rewritten, and must be accurately remembered if we're to learn from our mistakes and create a brighter future for our children. And isn't that what it's all about? Recently, Vice President Biden queried, why do Black Americans still love America after all they've been through? My answer is that we, like every other American, are mesmerized by the American dream. Now, the American dream isn't that opportunity for all of us to become billionaires. That is not the American dream. The American dream is actually aspirational. Thomas Jefferson aptly described the wishes of all human beings, the opportunity for self-determination. It is that basic, that simple. And we believe in America because we believe in that aspirational dream that to date we have struggled to provide all of America. Thomas Jefferson had a great mind. He was able to capture those words for eternity. A mind is a terrible thing to waste, and a dream is a horrible thing to lose. It was what it was, our history, but it does not have to continue. Change can happen. Change must happen. Thank you for participating. Stay safe. Good luck to all of us. Welcome to the conversation.